Hello, it's Jeta, and today I thought I would talk about the EPQ. I have gotten so many comments and messages, even on Instagram, asking me, should I take an EPQ, asking for advice, and rightly so, because there is so little information on the EPQ, which is very strange. I had to make this decision a year ago as well. I just thought I would share everything I know about the EPQ now that I've done it, and also my opinions on whether you should do an EPQ. So I am going to be answering questions such as what actually is an EPQ, why should you do an EPQ, and sort of what are the benefits and disadvantages of doing one. Should you do an EPQ if you take STEM subjects, so A-levels which aren't necessarily essay based? How much work is an EPQ? And also just my final opinions on my EPQ and why I don't regret doing the EPQ personally. So starting off with what actually is an EPQ. EPQ stands for Extended Project Qualification. It's basically just a project that you do over a long period of time. It is worth half an A-level, so essentially I think if you get an A-star it's worth 28 UCAS points. An EPQ can take many different forms. The traditional sort of essay dissertation style EPQ is not what you actually may end up doing. There are essentially three different types of EPQ. A secondary research project, which is what I did, which is essentially a 5,000 word essay which is based on others' research. So everything that you discuss or argue in your essay is going to be based off of others' work. So this may be articles that you've read, essays, documentaries, podcasts, whatever you choose to use as your research. Whatever you write will be based on that. The second type of thing is a primary research project. This is also a 5,000 word essay, but it is based on your own research. So you may have done experiments or like interviews, anything like that. This also tends to use others' research as well. So it won't just be based on what you've done, but it's primarily your own research, which is why it's called a primary research project, because you're not using secondary sources such as others' research, you're using your own sources, which is what you carry out. And that will have its own sort of criteria, such as having like your method, your aim all like laid out and things like that. So that's the second thing you can do. And the third EPQ you can do is an artifact project. This is basically an artifact which is accompanied by a 1,000 word, not really an essay, it's sort of commentary evaluation that goes alongside your artifact. The artifact can be anything from a painting, a sculpture, a piece of music you've created, a model, essentially anything that isn't an essay. It still has a point to it though. You're still answering the question or title that you've created, but you're just answering it in a non-verbal way. But remember, you do still need to write in 1,000 word commentary on the artifact. So I did just mention a topic or question. You do get to create your own question. Your EPQ can be on anything you want. There are a couple of rules. So for example, you can't do your EPQ on something that overlaps with one of your A-level subjects. So for example, if for history on the specification you are doing Russia, and including that you're doing the SARS, you can't write your EPQ on the SARS because it's sort of double credit, because you've studied that in class and then you're doing the EPQ, which means that you have to do less research. So there are a few rules, but other than that, you can pretty much do anything you want. I did my EPQ on why we like fictional villains. The reason behind this was to sort of combine my love for books with psychology. I talked a lot about the psychology behind why we do feel drawn to these characters that are morally bad, essentially. And it was a lot of fun, I have to say. But yeah, you basically can do anything you want. But alongside the essay, you do have to do your production log. It's a document which the exam board has that you have to fill, and it's essentially your process of your EPQ from initial idea all the way to your presentation at the end. So that is something you have to fill out, and then you also have to do your presentation, which comes after you finish the essay. So now on to why you should actually do an EPQ. What are the benefits? What are the disadvantages? So starting with the pros, probably the main practical benefit of doing EPQ which is probably the main reason why most people take an EPQ, and definitely a large part of why I took mine, is that you can get reduced offers from universities. But what does this mean? So for example, let's say you want to apply to Bath to do psychology and the entry requirements are A star AA. If you do an EPQ, they will be reduced to AAA. This is not the case for all universities, but a lot of unis do tend to lower entry requirements. But sometimes it will be like you have to have an A or an A star in your EPQ for the entry requirements to be lowered. So it's not necessarily just doing an EPQ. Sometimes you have to get a certain grade in the EPQ, but it can reduce your offer, which is obviously a big plus. The second pro is that it also gives you UCAS points, which also helps you in that university application process. And then the third pro is that you can write about it in your personal statement. So what I would say is that if you are going to do an EPQ, make sure to choose a topic which is related to what you want to study at uni. Otherwise you can't really talk about it as much in your personal statement. But those two benefits are all related to applying to university, which obviously is very helpful. But believe it or not, there are other benefits to taking EPQ, which I only sort of discovered after doing my EPQ. So the fourth benefit I would say is gaining a lot of independence. So, you know, you do have to set internal deadlines. You have to manage your time properly, organize, plan, and all these things are so important for your future as well. The fifth thing I would say is also decision making. No one really sits down to tell you how your EPQ should be structured in terms of the essay. No one sits down to tell you this is how you should do your research. No one really tells you anything. You just have to figure it out for yourself. You have to make the decision of, I'm going to structure my essay this way because it makes most sense for my question. Or I'm actually going to research into this subtopic because I think it might be really helpful for my essay. Making decisions without guidance is something that you are going to have to do in the future. And it's really difficult. And I was so bad at it at first. But you sort of just learn to do it and just take initiative essentially, and that is a very important skill to learn. A sixth benefit is learning to research effectively. There is so much material out there, and learning to filter out what is not credible, what is not necessary or useful for your essay is really hard, and I definitely learned that through doing the EPQ. And actually another benefit is learning all the nitty-gritty of essay writing, so learning to reference sources. Literally, how do you write out the sources? Like, what referencing system are you going to use? Harvard system or MA or whatever. Also learning to write your bibliography, learning to write an appendix if you need one. Also learning to do a literature review, especially if you're doing a primary research project. All of which are going to be helpful if you're going to pursue academics in the future. So those are also really good skills to learn. The eighth benefit of doing an EPQ is that it is so much closer to what you will do at university than any of your other A-levels. Your other A-levels, obviously you're getting more independence anyway at sixth form, but it still is a very structured teaching method that you are not getting at EPQ. And so that's another benefit, just that you are getting a taste of what learning at university will be like. And now for the cons, because there always are. Probably the main disadvantage is that it is very time consuming. When I say it's worth half an A-level, that's because you only do it for about a year. You'll either do it in year 12 or year 13, depending on your school. We did it in year 12, which I think is a lot better, because in year 13 you're a lot more busy, because obviously you've got to do your actual A-levels and also applying to university. But you're doing EPQ for a year, not 2, which is why it's worth half an A-level. But in that year, it is sort of like you're taking 4 A-levels, because it is a lot of work. And so you do have to bear that in mind. It is quite time consuming. And I will actually talk about how much work an EPQ actually is in a second. But I did also want to answer the question, should I do an EPQ if I do STEM subjects at A-level? So people who don't take essay-based subjects often don't take an EPQ because they don't think it will be useful for them. Obviously that reasoning does hold some logic, but I think at the same time, because you are taking very heavily scientific subjects which don't have a lot of writing, it can be good to show universities that you can write. By taking an EPQ, you can show them that you have this other skill which is extremely necessary for life. Like, you have to write all the time, you can't escape that. And it can be good to show universities that yes, you're very scientific, but you can also write too. It could also be an opportunity to just explore things that you haven't done in your STEM subjects. So for example, if you want to do medicine at uni, you could do an EPQ on medical ethics. Now to answer the question, actually how much work is an EPQ? Before I answer this, I do just want to preface that I did 3 A-levels and an EPQ. And at my school, people who did 4 A-levels weren't even allowed to take an EPQ. And I do sort of agree with this, because I think if you already take 4 A-levels, taking an EPQ might be a little bit too much. So do bear in mind how many A-levels you're taking before deciding whether or not you want to do an EPQ. There is no set time frame from the exam boards as to when you do your EPQ. It's essentially just during your A-levels, but schools normally do decide when you start and when you finish. Like, they will set their deadlines for when the EPQ has to be finished by. But according to the exam board, the EPQ should take approximately 120 hours to complete. Regarding how much time this actually is, I did my EPQ over about 8 months. We started very briefly in October, just sort of introducing it, but we properly started in November and we finished in June, which is 8 months. So if we do the maths, a month is around 4.5 weeks, times that by 8 months, which is 36, and then do 120 divided by 36, which is 3.33333. So in a week, that is around 3 to 4 hours of work per week for 8 months, in my case. You might have a very much shorter time frame, which means you have to do a lot more work every week, or you might have a longer time frame, which means you can do a bit less work every week. When I say 3 to 4 hours per week, take that with a pinch of salt. Certain periods of time will be a lot busier with your EPQ than others. So for example, when you're first starting your EPQ, that's very little work that you have to do. When you're in the research stage, that's probably a medium amount of work. The presentation is also a medium amount of work. The essay, I would say, is a lot of work. And so when I was writing my EPQ as an essay, I was spending a lot more than 3-4 hours per week on it, but then I wasn't spending as much time in the beginning, so it sort of averages out. On top of the independent work, I had a double lesson every other week with my EPQ teacher to learn about what the EPQ is, what it entails, the skills that you need, etc. But you obviously have to do extra work. You can't rely on just what you do in the lessons, because you don't actually work on your EPQ in the lessons. It's more just learning how to do the EPQ, if that makes sense. And yeah, you have to use independent time for EPQ. That's what it is essentially. So now for my sort of personal final opinions on the EPQ. As a sort of general, should you do an EPQ? I think yes. I have never regretted my decision to take it. Obviously, there have been times where I'm like, oh my gosh, this is taking so much of my time and I need to revise and I have to do this EPQ. And yes, sometimes I'm like, oh, maybe I should have left it. But, you know, after all of it, no, I don't regret it. You will learn so much during your EPQ. And I don't mean just about the topic that you've chosen, but also just skills that you definitely need in the future. I think it's quite interesting because going into the EPQ, I definitely decided to do it mainly because of that reduced offer. And now that I've finished, I value the skills that I've learned so much more than that reduced offer. So yeah, I think an EPQ is really fun. It's an opportunity for you to do what you love and are really passionate about. It's also got a load of practical benefits, like the reduced offers and writing about it in your personal statement. But at the end of the day, it is your decision to make. Obviously, some schools don't offer the EPQ, some schools make it compulsory. But if you are in the position where you are giving this choice, do you want to do an EPQ? I hope that this video helped you to make that decision and just gave you a bit more information than you previously had. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you have a lovely day. Bye.